Welcome to Big Question, the show where we will answer the question if the white man behind the curtain will ever let the black superhero save the world, or if they can only save Mr. Jones from their stereotypes. I'm Joseph, and I will be your host today as we dive deeper into this major question of the day. So, the first black superhero in mainstream American comic books was really Marvel's Black Panther, a name that I think we all know. So he is just a man from Wakanda who first appeared in Fantastic Four number 52 in July 1966. He's originally known as Cole Tiger, which is objectively a much worse name than Black Panther. But Black Panther has evolved into perhaps the most well-known black superhero alongside Blade, I would say. And kind of that being said, it was not Black Panther that really kickstarted the whole trend to where we are today with black superheroes. It was actually Meteor Man, who really had the mission of fighting off the ever so rampant gang problem in Washington, D.C., which doesn't really exist.
Oh yeah.
What's wrong with your man?
My man,
Don't touch my hand!
But that debuted in 1993, and like I was saying, that kind of kicked the movies off, that helped pave the way for black heroes on the big screen. So these black heroes are relatively recent creations, I would say. The first superhero overall is largely credited as the Phantom, who debuted on February 17th, 1936. And he was the first American superhero to appear on screen. Or let me correct myself. He was the first kind of superhero, but the first American superhero to appear on screen was Mandrake the Magician, who had a silly little mustache. And he debuted in 1939. So thus these white heroes have a lot more exposure and experience in comparison to their black counterparts. And even within this era of black heroes, we have Black Panther, we have the new Captain America, formerly known as Falcon, who is black. And then as well, we have some other new heroes entering the mold. Obviously, you have another new character that was introduced on the small screen in Disney Plus in kind of Spectrum. And so you have these new black superheroes being integrated, but they are still often defined by their proximity to whiteness. Obviously, Black Panther introduced in Captain America: Civil War. Falcon also very much tied to Captain America. And then even Spectrum, Monica Rambeau, really tied to Wanda, obviously introduced in Captain Marvel, and then also kind of got her powers in WandaVision, who are both heroes that are white. And additionally, they are largely confined to, quote-unquote, the hood. We're talking about, like, Luke Cage, the aforementioned Meteor Man, also kind of confined to those DC neighborhoods. So really, we have to question, why is this? And in this big question, we will explore the complexities of black respectability in the process of gradual integration in relation to white fragility to better understand this. So question number one, why are black heroes always saved by white people? And so what we mean by this is not necessarily that they are solely like, oh, this is a black hero in trouble, let me have this white hero come up and scoop them up and save the day. You know, this sometimes happens, but really we have to think about, like, why are they always so tied together? Why can't a black hero stand on their own? And I think, like we were talking about before, Black Panther is probably the most successful black superhero movie of all time. It grossed $1.344 billion at the box office, as well as received the highest Rotten Tomatoes score out of all of the MCU at 96%. So as that little grimy mouse that controls everything ran away with his money bags, one major problem showed up. Black Panther kind of broke open the black superhero scene, not to discredit any of the other ones like Blade, but in contemporary modern society, Black Panther was really a cultural kind of event. Having a black hero in the MCU was huge, which is largely why it got so much money, is because not only black people, but people of color overall flocked to the theater to see like this large, momentous occasion. And while T'Challa was largely able to kind of run Wakanda, save Wakanda himself, there was one character, Martin Freeman's character, General Everett Ross, who is a CIA agent, had a very interesting relationship with Wakanda. So he's brought into Wakanda in a rather unique situation.
Great, another broken white boy for us to fix.
He is injured by Killmonger, and T'Challa brings him to Wakanda so Shuri can help fix him, patch him up, nurse him, etc. And so after being fixed, you have the final battle on Wakanda, and he pilots a Wakandan ship remotely from Shuri's lab, where he makes a seemingly sacrifice play to take down these weapon shipments of Wakandan weapons that will, seemingly fall into the wrong hands and cause this mass chaos across the globe. And why I kind of put air quotes around sacrifice is he doesn't die, but he ends up just kind of like, wiping out the ships, and then he like scoots off, runs away. But this kind of centered him as a character who was willing to make this sacrifice play, and really made him seem like a really like central character, a selfless character, and him being basically the only majorly important white person, a white protagonist in this movie, and his relation to the CIA, who has a less than stellar relationship, to say the least, with African countries, is very interesting. And so questioning why did this happen, I think really helps us get to the root cause of why this whiteness is so central to black characters. So as Jeremy Young said, black charismatic orators throughout history who have advocated for racial equality have found most white audiences hardened, closed-minded, and determined to silence them by force, end quote. So what does this mean? We have to take a step back and look. So you have these charismatic black people who advocated for the equity of all races, and in our own perspective right now, yes, that is, like, why would you oppose that? But you also have to think, as a byproduct of that, white people who have this elevated level of authority, level of power within society, see that as you taking power away from them. So the equity is not, to them, raising black people up, but so much as bringing black people down. Bringing white people down to the level of black people. And their kind of resistance to that does reveal the nature of them knowing that black people are not treated the same way as white people within society. And so what does this mean for comic books? Well, this leads the need to have black people kind of gradually integrated into white society by being associated with white characters. This is because they don't want to see these black characters on the same level as white characters, because they don't want their children to look up to black characters. They want their children to look up to white characters. They don't see black characters on being the same level as white characters. And so this way of their characterization of self in relation to whiteness makes their blackness something more palatable for white people. But also these black characters are forced to be perfect at all times, kind of going back to respectability. They are expected to kind of emulate this whole aura of whiteness within their own blackness. So yes, they are black, but it is that they happen to be black, not so much that they are encompassing the entirety of blackness in its concept. So it's kind of erasing blackness as much as possible by placing them next to these white people who can show them how to kind of be a hero. Because Marvel relies heavily on white saviors to help them bring their black heroes to their full capability, and the reassurance that they are both smart and capable by white characters helps them have the ability to achieve that true potential. And so this relationship is starkly similar to many Southern slaveholders' assertion that slavery civilizes black people. And so it is not as much of a direct comparison that, slavery is, and comic books are on the same level, because obviously that assertion is a whole nother thing. but it's more saying that we have to think about why white people always need to confine black people to certain spaces and to certain kind of just rigid stereotypes in order to see them as civilized, as good enough to be on the same level as white people. And so black superheroes, as a byproduct of all of this, are really forced to just be white characters who happen to be black, if that makes sense. So it is not so much that they're their own people with their own culture and have these entirely different stories. It is written as a white character who just has a different skin color and erases a lot of what makes blackness meaning their culture and their relationships with other people. Question number 2. What is with black heroes only being allowed to save the block?
Oh snap, you Luke. I didn't mean that.
Give me your phone. The phone, fool.
Yo, my bad, man. You know, I just got a little nervous and shit when he threw my mans across the door.
Wow. You know, what inspiring stuff by Luke Cage. A selfless man who just wants to save his neighborhood. So just like the aforementioned Meteor Man, Luke Cage is confined to his corner of the neighborhood and doesn't extend to saving the world and eating shawarma like some of the white heroes get to do. In most of these stories, they lean heavily on stereotypes like the crime-ridden black community who suffers from gang violence, and this gang violence is also very much following the stereotype of black-on-black crime. A lot of the heads of this organized crime, or just a lot of the gang members in general, are black, and so you have the stereotype of, you know, black people, if they could just get out of their own way, could really, you know, thrust themselves into society and be on the same level as white people. And it is really, you know, their own doing on why they haven't been able to kind of pick themselves up by the bootstraps and get out of here. And so this kind of helps perpetuate the story of the stereotypical brute and the civilized nature of black people, or more like the uncivilized nature of black people. And although it is a black hero stopping these issues, he is kind of an outlier that really doesn't represent the whole of the black community. But we have to think, quote, ghettos did not just happen by accident. They were primarily in cities of the Northeast and Midwest, formed during the first half of the 20th century. That formation came as a direct result of specifically racist government policies, economic and labor factors that drastically disadvantaged black workers, and actual racial violence that made it impossible for blacks to live in other neighborhoods. These factors created conditions for the urban uprisings of the 60s, so confining black heroes to these hoods make it ever difficult to break out of these stereotypes. And so what this means is you have all of this history, this racial history, this racist history that kind of created these ghettos, these hoods, whatever you want to call them, and you're confining black heroes to stopping everything that happened in here. And so as a byproduct, you are kind of taking all that blame and putting it on the black community, on black heroes. The government really has to shoulder much of this blame for the situation that they created. However, by letting black heroes be the ones that are kind of expected to stop all this crime and everything else wrong within these communities, they're kind of absolving themselves of any kind of accountability or anything related to it, because it is now, they step back, it's solve it yourself. But it also prevents them, both the black hero and black society, from interacting with white society. It keeps them separate from the majority of white society and allows their blackness to exist separately from the rest of society and not have to have their whiteness threatened by it. So you have this powerful black man or powerful black woman, but confining them to only other black people makes it so, you know, these other strong white heroes aren't threatened by the presence of a black hero, but also that children don't have to look up to black heroes. They can look up to the white heroes. And so as Luke Cage saves the neighborhood shop and runs away from the crime boss, the Johnsons on the white side of town are sitting around the dinner table with a shrine of Captain America, since he was allowed to save New York, and Luke stayed home even though he was a few blocks away in Harlem. And so what does this mean for black heroes to be confined? It really means that their blackness is confined and that it is not allowed to kind of penetrate society and kind of like taint it. And so it is really keeping white society safe from this like powerful, charismatic black hero who perhaps children would look up to. So final question, how does the film industry help perpetuate narratives of discrimination? So Robin DiAngelo talks about quote-unquote white solidarity, a notion that white people stand with one another in a way that avoids making other white people feel bad by avoiding conversations about race and discrimination. So this bonding over white solidarity creates a situation where race is entirely shied away from and black stories are avoided entirely. This is not because they are not present and not important, but they are just considered less important than the notion of making sure that white people don't feel bad. And you often see this notion or this discussion around, it wasn't me who did it, it was my ancestors. Why are you punishing me for the actions of my ancestors? But what is not reconciled with is that the actions of the ancestors and kind of the effects of whatever those actions were are still ever present in society. And so it was a thing discussed that, quote, some comics reveal deceptively soothing stereotypes lurking behind their veneers of diversity, whereas other shows have complex considerations of identity, end quote. And so we're seeing those effects because those actions of the ancestors created this current system in Hollywood that we're seeing that has a lot of kind of racial undertones, racist undertones. And so even if it isn't quote unquote these like people exactly that are racist and creating these systems, they're still operating within these racist systems. And so that's why you have these stereotypes being perpetuated, like with Luke Cage. And also you have to think about who is creating these movies. This kind of all largely stems from who is behind the creative team of these movies. 61% of MCU actors are white, and only 15% of Marvel movies have been headed by a non-white director. So you're going to run into these issues of representation and storytelling. And even then, when you have, these people of color or black directors, black actors in these stories, it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to be stories that have kind of these problematic entities. I mean, we talked about Black Panther at the start of this. Ryan Coogler is a black director, and obviously that cast is largely black, majority black. But you still have, Everett Ross in this kind of like weird white savior role. It really doesn't make sense with like the most advanced nation, not even in Africa, but in the world, who has the highest technology, who is supposed to be able, if anybody else can exist without the need of help from white people, it would be Wakanda. But they still have this white CIA agent who has to come in and kind of save them. And so Black Panther, Shang-Chi, Eternals all really had unique storytelling in relation to the rest of the MCU because they had both diversity in cast and creative team. And so that's when you get these changing narratives that break out of these stereotypical molds in relation to whiteness. But this also largely falls under descriptive representation, which descriptive representation occurs when people share some descriptive characteristic with like their constituent, their audience, etc. And so this means that it may not always change the narrative, the system it operates within, but is still entrapped by whiteness, but you at least have some kind of visual representation, and like the aforementioned kind of importance of children looking up to superheroes and kind of the perpetuation of cycles. Having this representation is still important. And so with these three questions kind of all accumulated in the final question, will a black hero ever be able to save the world? The answer is not no, but it is also not yes. It is more of a nuanced answer in that Hollywood itself is going to have to take a look at itself and change a system. You cannot currently operate within the system that Hollywood operates within, where it is majority white. You have kind of these old white kind of heads of studios running everything. You can bring in as much diversity in cast and crew and creative team as you want, but if the heads are still operating within a system that perpetuates these stereotypes, it's not going to work. But there also is a problem with society as a whole. Society is afraid of the strong black character, the strong black person who holds a lot of power. You saw this in response to President Obama. You have this strong black man leading the kind of the nation and what is perceived as kind of the pinnacle of democracy in the world. And there was a lot of response to that kind of almost flipped all the way on the other side. And you follow that up with Donald Trump, who led an era of heightened racial tension. And then obviously you have a lot more tension now following the murder of George Floyd. And so you have these responses to strong black people coming and now kind of trying to oppose that as much as possible. So it also is the superhero genre is a reflection on society. And so in order to really have a black hero who can save the world, you also have to make sure that society can palette a black hero without going a full, kind of 180 and meeting it with racism and hate. And so it is the question, not if the black hero can save the world, but if white society will ever get out of the way and allow a black hero to thrive. Because they have the capability to. They have every capability to. They have the stories to. They exist. But it is more of a question on if the systems of society can let it happen. And with that, that is the end of this big question. Thank you for watching, and peace out. Later.